He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Just sat there, scrolling, voice flat like he was reading a grocery list, and told me his brother needed money again. Not asked, told. And something in my chest went very, very still. My name is Sarah. I'm 31 years old. I'm a senior UX designer at a firm in Austin, and for the last 4 years I have been the invisible engine of a life that everyone else seems to enjoy more than I do. I make good money. Not bragging money, just quiet, consistent, built from nothing money that I earned by working nights and weekends when my husband was still figuring out what he wanted to be. I don't say that with bitterness. I used to say it with pride. The distinction matters. My husband and I met in our mid-20s when neither of us had much. We built things together, or so I believed. When I got promoted and my income jumped, I told myself we were a team, that the extra income was ours. That success shared was success doubled. I opened joint accounts. I added his name to things. I said yes to things I should have questioned because saying yes felt like love, and I confused the two for a very long time. His family is loud and close in the way that sounds warm from the outside. Sunday dinners. Group chats that never stop. His mother, who calls herself the glue and means it in the most controlling way possible. His younger brother, who is 28, charming in the way that coasts on charm instead of building anything, and who has been between jobs in the way that some people are between jobs for 3 years running. They welcomed me when we got married. They called me family. And slowly, steadily, without a single dramatic moment I could point to, they started treating my income like a communal resource I had agreed to share. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing no one tells you. It happens in degrees so small you almost don't notice until one day you're standing in your own kitchen feeling like a stranger. It started with small things. My brother-in-law needed his car fixed. $500. Then it was first and last on a new apartment because his credit wasn't great yet. We'll pay you back when he gets settled. Then it was a laptop because you can't job hunt without a computer, obviously. Each one arrived packaged as temporary, as logical, as what family does. My husband presented each request with the same tired patience, like I was the one being unreasonable for pausing before I said yes. I said yes anyway. Every time. What I didn't know, what I would only discover later when I finally sat down and really looked, was that my husband had been saying yes before he even asked me. Transfers had gone out before conversations happened. Decisions had been made, and I was informed after the fact, which isn't a conversation, it's a notification. The vacation was when it became impossible to ignore. His family planned a trip to Florida. A long weekend, beach house rental, everyone pitching in. I was told the total cost and my share. I paid it without flinching because I make good money and I know it, and I don't hold that over anyone. What I didn't know was that my brother-in-law had quietly upgraded the house to a larger property after I'd already paid, and the difference had been charged to the card I'd added to the shared booking account for incidentals. $740. For incidentals. For a room upgrade he decided on without mentioning it to me. I found out on the second day of the trip when I checked my bank app out of habit at breakfast. I sat at a table full of people I was paying for, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something that had been building for a long time and finally had a name. I didn't say anything at the table. I smiled. I passed the orange juice. I laughed at the right moments. But I was already somewhere else in my head, already starting to count. My mother-in-law noticed something was off in the way perceptive people do when they're the source of attention. She touched my arm at one point and said, "I seem tired." I told her the drive had worn me out. She nodded warmly and said family trips always required one person to do more of the heavy lifting, and that's what the strong ones are for. She meant it as a compliment. It landed like a blueprint. On the drive home, I asked my husband about the charge. Casually, no edge in my voice. Just asked if he knew his brother had upgraded the house and put it on my card. He was quiet for a moment that lasted too long, and then he said his brother had mentioned it but figured it wouldn't be a big deal given what we paid for the whole trip anyway. We? As though we had the same relationship to that money. As though the person who earned it and the person who spent it without asking were equally positioned. I didn't argue. I filed it. That night, while my husband slept, I opened my laptop and I did what I should have done a year earlier. I went through everything. Every account, every statement, every transfer going back 18 months. I gave myself 3 hours and a cup of coffee, and I treated it like a work project because that's how I function when I need to be accurate instead of emotional. What I found wasn't a scandal. It was quieter than that and somehow worse. 41 transfers over 18 months. Some small, some not small. Gas money, grocery runs, a medical copay, a speeding ticket, a flight home for Christmas that I thought my husband had covered with his own card. The kind of thing that individually sounds like basic family support and collectively looks like a system. Not one big betrayal. 41 small ones, each one normalized, each one invisible on its own, each one quietly counting on the fact that I was too busy, too trusting, or too tired to add them up. The total came to just under $11,000. I sat with that number for a while. I didn't cry. I was surprised by that. I think some part of me had already known and had been protecting itself by not looking directly at it. When you finally see something clearly, the grief is quieter than you expect because the shock has already been processed in pieces. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours, and I thought about what kind of woman I wanted to be on the other side of this moment. There's a dinner his family does every year for his mother's birthday. 30 people. Catered. Everyone in their good clothes, toasts, and stories, and the particular performance of closeness that families sometimes mistake for actual intimacy. I had attended every one. I had contributed to every one. I had smiled in every photo. This year it fell on a Saturday in late October, 2 weeks after I'd done my accounting. I went. I wore a dress I liked. I sat at the table between my husband and his aunt, and I was entirely present and entirely decided. Midway through the main course, my brother-in-law stood up. He was holding a glass, and he was grinning the way he does when he wants everyone to look at him, which is always. He said he wanted to say something about family. He talked for a while about hard times and support, and what it means to have people who show up for you. He looked at my husband while he said it. Then he looked at me. He said I was the kind of person who gave without keeping score, who understood that family wasn't a transaction, who set the standard for what generosity really meant. People smiled. His mother put her hand over her heart. My husband nodded, like this was a tribute he'd organized. I looked at my brother-in-law while he spoke, and I felt nothing dramatic. No flush of anger. No urge to stand and correct the record in front of everyone. I had already decided that public scenes were not my style, and that the most powerful moves are the ones no one watches happen. I smiled, raised my glass with everyone else, and I thought, you have no idea. The next morning, I called a financial advisor I'd consulted once before and scheduled an appointment. Then I called a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. A contracts attorney I'd worked with on a freelance matter a few years back. I told her I needed to understand my options around undisclosed marital transfers and informal family loans. She told me to bring documentation. I had plenty. My husband noticed I'd been quieter than usual. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just focused on a project at work. He accepted that because he had always accepted the explanations that required nothing of him. I separated my personal accounts first. Quietly, efficiently, moved direct deposit, updated authorizations, removed the card from any shared or family-adjacent accounts. I didn't tell him immediately. I made sure everything was in order first. Then I told him, over dinner on a Tuesday, in the same tone I'd used to say I'd switched phone carriers. He stared at me. He asked what I meant, why I'd done that. I said I was restructuring how I managed my finances. He asked if something was wrong. I said there wasn't anything wrong. I said I'd been reviewing our accounts, and I had questions I needed answered before I could feel comfortable with our current setup. He asked what kind of questions. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It had 2 columns, dates and amounts. I'd kept it clean, no accusations, just data. He looked at it for a long time. He said some of those he'd meant to tell me about. He said the rest were small things, family things, things he didn't think required a formal conversation. He said he didn't know it would add up to that much. I said I believed him, and I meant it. I don't think he sat down and calculated how to drain me. I think he was sloppy and cowardly, and he took the path of least resistance every single time, which is its own kind of choice. I told him I needed full transparency going forward, a clear agreement about any financial support to his family, and reimbursement of the total on the page. I told him those three things were not negotiable. He exhaled. He said his family was going to think I was being harsh. I told him his family's feelings about my money were exactly the problem. The first call from my brother-in-law came 3 days later. He was warm at first. "Checking in," he said. "Just wanted to make sure things were good." I let him talk for a minute, and then I said I was glad he called because I had something to address with him directly. I walked through the list. Not all of it, just the major items. I told him I expected repayment of the amounts that had no documentation, starting with the largest. The warmth dropped out of his voice immediately. He said I was being ridiculous. He said this was family, not a business deal. He said I clearly didn't understand what it meant to support the people around you. He said a lot of things that were designed to make me feel small. I let him finish. Then I said I'd sent a written summary to his email and that I'd give him 30 days before I took next steps. He laughed. He said good luck with that. I thanked him and hung up. My mother-in-law called that evening. She did not attempt warmth. She went straight to the performance of wounded dignity, the one where a woman who has spent years benefiting from your silence suddenly acts as though your voice is an act of violence. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said her son had bent over backwards for me for years. She said I had no idea what family sacrifice looked like. I told her respectfully that I disagreed with her characterization. I told her I'd been happy to support the family for a long time, and that I was simply asking for clarity and accountability going forward. I told her nothing in my email had been aggressive, only specific. She told me to enjoy my money since it clearly mattered more to me than people did. I said goodbye and ended the call. My husband was sitting on the couch when I came back into the room. He'd heard my side of the conversation. He looked like a man who had spent years hoping two things would never have to meet and was now watching the collision happen in his living room. He asked me to ease up. He said his family wasn't used to this. I asked what they weren't used to. He couldn't finish the sentence. That was telling. Here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. When I'd met with my lawyer, she had walked through the documentation with me, and she'd flagged something I hadn't thought to look for. Several of the larger transfers had been made in amounts and patterns that, combined with my brother-in-law's self-employment status, had tax implications he may not have reported correctly. Not my problem to solve. Not my responsibility to hide, either. My lawyer had sent a very professional letter to his address. Nothing threatening, just a formal accounting. The kind that tends to clarify priorities very quickly. Within 6 days, my husband came to me with a different tone entirely. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd slid that piece of paper a week before, and he was quieter than I'd heard him in years. He said his brother wanted to work something out. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he was sorry. I asked what he was sorry for specifically. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry he hadn't protected me. He said he'd told himself he was keeping the peace, and he understood now that he'd been keeping it at my expense. I appreciated him saying it. I want to be clear about that. But an apology describes the past. It doesn't redesign the future. And I had already spent enough time waiting for someone else's words to make me feel secure. My brother-in-law repaid the money. Not all at once, and not with grace, but he paid it because the alternative had consequences he wasn't equipped to face. The last transfer came through on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, and I sat with my phone in my hands for a moment, not triumphant, just finished. My husband and I are in counseling now. It's honest work, the kind that requires both people to show up fully and tell the truth about things they'd rather smooth over. Some days it's productive. Some days it's hard in the way that real things are hard. I don't know yet what the outcome will be. I'm not invested in a particular ending anymore, only in an honest one. What I am certain of is this. I spent 4 years making myself easy to manage. I called it being low maintenance. I called it being a good partner. I called it not sweating the small stuff. What it actually was a systematic erosion of my own self-advocacy, one small yes at a time, until the people around me had mapped out every gap in my attention and called it permission. The morning I did that accounting, I wasn't angry at my husband or his family. I was angry at the version of myself who had looked at $11,000 of evidence and found a reason every single time not to look too closely. That's the person I had to have the hardest conversation with. My mother-in-law told me I didn't understand family sacrifice. What I understand now is the difference between sacrifice and extraction. Sacrifice is chosen, freely, with full information, and it comes from surplus, not from fear of being seen as difficult. Extraction is what happens when someone reads your generosity as unlimited, your silence as consent, and your patience as a contract they never signed but intend to collect on anyway. I stopped being the woman who could be collected. I'm still in Austin, still designing, still drinking the same brand of coffee I've had every morning since grad school. My life looks almost the same from the outside. But from the inside, from the part that sits at a kitchen table at midnight and tells the truth to a spreadsheet, something has settled in a way it hadn't in years. My brother-in-law doesn't call anymore. My mother-in-law sends occasional group texts that I read and don't reply to. My husband still sleeps on his side of the bed, and we are still figuring out whether two people can rebuild trust once the scaffolding comes down. I don't know yet, but I know the answer has to be true. The last thing I'll say is this. There's a particular cruelty in being thanked publicly for something you were taken from privately. Standing at that birthday dinner, listening to my brother-in-law make a toast about my generosity while my stolen money paid for the centerpieces was the loneliest I have felt in my adult life. Not because I was surrounded by people who didn't care about me, but because I was surrounded by people who cared about the version of me that stayed quiet, and I had finally decided that version was not available anymore. I didn't make a scene at the dinner. I didn't need to. The work I did in the following weeks was quieter and more permanent than any scene ever could have been. Silence has been used against me for a long time. I know how to use it now myself. Generosity has a floor. Accountability has no ceiling. And the moment I stopped being convenient, I finally found out exactly who had ever actually seen me.